Ann's car was a half block away from the pizza parlor, and the two of them started toward it. Neither spoke as they walked toward the car. It was parked on the same side of the street as the pizza parlor, so Ann started to walk onto the street to get behind the steering wheel. Billy staggered toward the car and was almost there when he pitched forward headfirst into the side of the car. The force of his collision with the door of the car bounced him backward several feet, and he landed on his left side with a thud. Ann hurried around to where Billy lay on the sidewalk, writhing in pain and cursing under his breath. "Christ," said Billy. "Shit, oh dear. I think my arm is broken." Just as Ann reached him and knelt down and put her hand under his head, Billy passed out cold. "Oh, Billy," she said, "what in the hell am I going to do with you?" Ann heard footsteps coming toward her, and she looked up to see the big man from the bar approaching. "I hope you don't mind. I was watching after you. Your friend had the look of someone who might not make it to the car, so I thought I'd better keep an eye on him and you." "Can I give you a hand getting him into your car?" the man asked. "I'm Police Detective Ann Barton. This is Officer Billy Thompson," Ann said. "Who are you?" The man told Ann his name, and when she was satisfied he was just a harmless patron of the pizza parlor, she said, "Sure. Let's get him into the car and I'll take him to the clinic. He isn't usually like this. Evidently he isn't a big drinker. For sure he's not a good drinker." A few minutes later, Ann pulled up in front of the clinic. Luckily, there was still someone on duty at the desk, and Ann asked for someone to bring a gurney and take Billy inside. An orderly came out to the car, and with the help of Ann and the big man, loaded Billy onto the gurney and rolled him inside. Ann explained to the admissions clerk who she and Billy were, but didn't say just how the injury to his head occurred. Of course, the orderly and the clerk were acutely aware of Billy's drunken condition. He reeked of beer, sweat, and blood, but mostly beer. The big man asked if Ann would be all right, and she said she would, and thanked him for his help. And he left. Billy awoke about 4 o'clock the next morning, confused and wanting to know why he was in this hospital bed. He found a buzzer switch, pressed it, and waited for someone to arrive. After it became obvious no one was coming, he sat up in bed and put his feet on the floor. Unsteadily, he stood up, and immediately his head began to spin and tiny pinpoint flashes of light swam in front of his face. He quickly sat back down on the bed, leaned back, and closed his eyes. The flashes of light and dizziness subsided, and he once again opened his eyes. At that moment, an orderly came into his room and approached his bed. "I see you're awake," he said. "How do you feel?" "Dizzy," answered Billy. "How did I get here?" he asked. "What happened?" "Are you sober?" the orderly asked with a grin. "You were out of it last night when your girlfriend brought you in. Looks like you have a pretty good bump on your forehead. I understand you took a header into her car door. She said her car door was worse off than you were. She was really pissed." "Where is she?" Billy asked. "She stuck around here last night until you started snoring. Then she said, 'Screw it.' He just passed out drunk and left. She went home, I guess." "Oh, man," Billy said, "I really blew it. What now? I'm screwed for sure. She'll never come around now." "Hey, man," the orderly said, "just what have you got going?" Billy looked up sharply and realized he had spoken aloud. "Nothing," he said. "It's nothing. I was just mumbling, thinking out loud." "Sounds like something to me," the orderly said with a knowing grin. Billy's face flushed red, and gruffly he said, "Never mind, it's none of your damn business. Where are my clothes? I've got to get out of here." The orderly stepped back at the sound of the anger in Billy's voice and said, "I didn't mean anything. I was just joking." "Where are my clothes?" Billy asked again. "I don't think you can leave. The nurse has to release you first, and she won't be in until 8 o'clock. "You wait," snapped Billy. "I have to be at work at 6. And he swung out of bed. A sharp pain flashed through his left arm, and he winced at it. "I must have hurt my arm last night. Is it broken?" he asked. "No, just bruised. We x-rayed it when you came in. The x-rays showed no fractures," the orderly said. "Get my clothes," ordered Billy, in the most authoritative voice he could muster. "Get my clothes." It must have been enough because the orderly complied. "I'll have to write this up, of course," he said. "Are you sure you're all right?" "I will be," said Billy, "as soon as I have a cup of coffee." Billy dressed and left, walking as briskly as he could manage in his condition. 10 minutes later, he got to his house and put on a pot of Folgers. 12 minutes later, when the coffee had perked, it takes 12 minutes, he poured a cup and began to sip it. In a while, he felt better. He was fully awake now and felt as if he had slept all night, not just passed out. Suddenly, he was extremely hungry, and right on cue, his stomach began to growl, and he broke 2 eggs into a skillet and put bread into the toaster. He cut a thick slab of ham and put it in next to the eggs, and soon he was enjoying a hearty breakfast and sipping hot coffee. Boy, he thought as he finished his meal, how good can it get? Then reality set in, and he said aloud, boy, am I in a world of hurt. Ann is going to be so pissed she'll probably tell the chief and everybody else about last night. I've had it. Billy pondered the idea of not going into work today. He could say he wasn't feeling well and he needed to stay home, or he could call in and admit to what the chief would already know about last night and apologize and volunteer to take some time off without pay. He could do these things, but he knew he wouldn't. Billy may be somewhat erratic at times, but no one could ever accuse him of neglecting his duty or not being responsible for his actions. He knew he would go to work and take whatever he had coming. Billy quickly showered, shaved, and got dressed for work. He had a clean uniform hanging in the closet, and he put it on and brushed his shoes. He examined himself in the mirror, and except for a bruise on his forehead, he looked ready for anything. Then he stepped out onto the sidewalk and started walking toward town. It was 20 minutes before 6, and Billy was approaching the pizza parlor on his way to the station. He was in luck. His car was still at the curb in front of the cafe. Great, thought Billy. At least I won't have to walk home when I get busted by the chief. He climbed into the car and started it. And then he drove to the office and parked in the side parking lot. It was 5 minutes till 6, and he tried the door. It was open, and he went in. Ann was at her desk and looked up as he approached her. Just then, the door opened behind him, and the chief entered. Billy turned to face him and said, "Good morning, Chief." The chief said, "Good morning, Billy," and looked at Ann and said, "Good morning, Detective." Ann nodded and said, "Good morning, Chief." Then she looked at Billy and said, "Good morning, Billy. How are you this morning?" "Okay, I guess," Billy answered warily, not knowing yet what to expect. At that moment, the chief turned to Billy and said, "What happened to your head? How did you get that bruise?" Instantly, Billy's heart raced and he gulped and started to speak. But before he could say anything, Ann said, "He was helping me change the tire and the jack slipped. He reached to try to stop it and banged his head on the door of my car. There isn't any brain damage, though, just a bruise. No brain damage." Chief laughed aloud, and Billy said, "That's for sure." Chief said, "All right, let's go to work." And he turned away and started for his office. Billy looked at Ann, and she pressed her finger against her lips in a gesture that meant quiet. Billy was curious, but happy to comply. Billy sat at his desk scanning the crime reports, such as they were, and sipping a cup of strong coffee when the phone on his desk rang. It startled him, and he jumped noticeably and stared at the phone. It rang the second time, and the chief stepped through the door and looked at Billy quizzically. On the third ring, Billy picked up the phone, placed it to his ear, and said, "Sheriff's Department, Officer Thompson." There was a silence, and he said, "Hello." The familiar voice said, "You're out of it. You're lucky." "What do you mean?" Billy asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of his voice. There was a click on the line indicating the caller had hung up the phone. The chief, still standing in the door of his office, asked, "What was that all about? I need to go back up here." There was silence. I need to reread this. Placed it to his ear and said, "Sheriff's Department, Officer Thompson." There was silence, and he said, "Hello?" A familiar voice said, "You're out of it. You're lucky." "What do you mean?" Billy asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of his voice. There was a click on the line indicating the caller had hung up the phone. The chief, still standing in the door of his office, asked, "What was that all about?" "I don't know," replied Billy. But he did know what the call meant. He knew exactly what it meant. Billy's stomach filled with butterflies. He felt himself redden and the hair on the back of his neck stand up. His skin crawled and he began to itch all over. Billy stood up and took a deep breath, sucking in air deeply, then blowing it out slowly. He did this twice, then he began to breathe more swiftly. He tried to suck in air slowly again, but he couldn't. He began to breathe more and more rapidly until he was panting as if he had run a mile in 3 minutes. He leaned forward and held onto the desk. He looked as if he would crash forward at any second. Ann looked at him at the same time the chief came back into the room. "Billy," the chief said, "what the hell's going on?" Ann quickly crossed the room and took Billy's arm and forcibly shoved him into a chair. He was still breathing rapidly. Ann went into a storage room and came out with a large paper bag. She blew it out to full size and put one hand on the back of Billy's head and held the bag over his mouth. "Blow into this," she said. "You're hyperventilating and you have to blow into this bag and breathe out of it." Billy did as he was told, and soon his breathing began to subside. Billy said, "I itch all over," and he began to scratch his arms and chest. Billy began to mumble as he breathed in and out of the bag. The chief said, "What are you saying?" Billy said, "I don't know what will happen. I just don't know." He began to speak loudly and kept saying, "I don't know what will happen. I don't know what will happen." "What the hell is going on?" the chief asked again. He grabbed both of Billy's arms roughly just as the phone rang. He jerked Billy to his feet and asked again what was going on. Ann answered the phone and listened for a minute, then holding the phone toward Billy said, "It's for you." "No, I don't want to talk to anyone," said Billy. He was beginning to sound almost hysterical, and the chief released his arms and stepped back with a puzzled look on his face. Billy calmed a bit when he was released from the chief's grip. "Officer Thompson," she said, "it's for you." "No, I don't want to talk to anyone right now," Billy mumbled and collapsed onto the chair. "I think you'd better take this call," said Ann. "It's the fire chief." Billy groaned loudly and stood up and began to walk toward the door. Ann caught him before he could leave and thrust the phone at him. "Take it," she shouted. Billy looked at the phone for a few seconds as if it were alive and something to fear. Finally, he stepped forward and took the phone and placed it up to his ear. "This is Officer Thompson," he said with a shaky voice. What's the problem?" "You better come to your house," he said, "or what's left of it. It looks like something blew it up. Maybe there was a gas leak." "All right," Billy said quietly. "I'll be right there." "What is it?" asked Ann. Billy didn't answer. He stood up and walked toward the door. The chief stepped in front of Billy and asked what the problem was. Billy looked at the chief and calmly said, "Move." With a puzzled look, the chief stepped aside. He asked if Billy wanted him or Ann to go along with him. He said it wouldn't be necessary. And he walked out the door and to his car. He started the car and he drove away. Billy slowly drove toward his house. He was puzzled, but he felt calmer and more serene than he could ever remember feeling. It was as if a heavy load of which he had been completely unaware had been lifted from his shoulders. Billy drove to the corner where he would turn right to go to his house. He stopped at the corner. He could see his house from where he was. The fire trucks and emergency vehicles were there, with their lights flashing. Firemen were training their hoses on the smoldering ruins of what had once been a nice house, Billy's nice house. Aloud, Billy said, "Everything I own was in that house. I guess there's no reason to go there now." Then Billy turned left and drove to the highway that leads out of town. He felt free, freer than he had ever felt before. It was a strange but extremely pleasant feeling. Folks, that concludes chapter 6. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with chapter 7 before very long. So this is JC. I'll see you down the road if the good Lord's willing and the creek don't rise. Thank you.